Now on BBC One, Sophie Rayworth with the BBC News at 10.
Tonight at 10, major trials in Britain show a new vaccine is particularly effective against the UK variant. It's called Novavax. It's an American vaccine that's being made here. If approved, the UK has 60 million doses on order.
It's made in Teesside, so not only have we trialled the vaccine to show that it's safe and effective, but we're also making it too. So we'll be able to save lives in the UK.
It comes as the EU battles with a shortage of vaccine, empty vaccination centres in Germany as jabs are postponed. We'll have the latest details on this new vaccine that's been developed also tonight. The Prime Minister on a visit to Scotland. He calls arguments about holding a Scottish independence referendum completely irrelevant during the pandemic. In prison after flying home from medical treatment in Germany, Russia's opposition leader calls his detention illegal as a court rejects his appeal. The cladding crisis, the woman who lost everything after buying a flat that turned out to be unsafe. And the 93-year-old Holocaust survivor who went viral after having his coronavirus vaccine.
And coming up in sport on BBC News, Liverpool's goal drought is over. They've scored their first of 2021 against Tottenham in the Premier League, but can they hold on for the win?
Good evening. There's more good news tonight for the UK's vaccination programme. A fourth vaccine could be approved shortly after major trials in the UK showed it was particularly effective against the UK variant. Novavax is an American jab, but it's being produced here in the UK in a factory on Teesside. Tonight, the Prime Minister thanked all the volunteers involved in the trials and said if approved by the UK's medicine regulator, the UK has 60 million doses on order. The news came amid a deepening row between AstraZeneca and the European Union over vaccine shortages. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, reports.
Once again, science has triumphed in the fight against coronavirus. The US firm Novavax has released results of its British trial showing the first proven efficacy against the new, more contagious UK variant. There were more than 15,000 volunteers on the trial throughout the UK. Over half the cases of COVID recorded were the result of the new variant. The result showed the vaccine was 95% effective against the original COVID strain and over 85% effective against the new UK variant, giving an overall efficacy of 89%. The former head of the UK Vaccine Task Force said that in a separate trial in South Africa, the vaccine had showed it protected against the variant of concern there.
It's a fantastic result because it shows that the Novavax vaccine is effective against both the UK variant as well as the South African variant and has shown phenomenal efficacy, and it's made in Teesside. So not only have we trialled the vaccine to show that it's safe and effective, but we're also making it too. So we'll be able to save lives in the UK.
Okay, ready? Meanwhile, the biggest immunisation drive in the history of the NHS just keeps growing. This supermarket pharmacy near Birmingham started offering COVID jabs today to the over 75s, one of more than 1,400 vaccination sites in England alone. What a contrast in Madrid, where supplies of vaccine have all but dried up. The Spanish capital has cancelled all appointments for around 2 weeks. The EU was slow off the mark in ordering vaccine and now wants some of the UK's supply of AstraZeneca doses. In May, the UK government was the first to sign a deal with AstraZeneca for 100 million doses of its COVID vaccine. It wasn't until August, 3 months later, that the European Union signed an agreement for up to 400 million doses. Last month, the UK's MHRA became the first regulator in the world to approve the Oxford AstraZeneca jab. Tomorrow, the European Medicines Agency is meeting and is expected to approve the vaccine, but for the moment, it remains unlicensed in the EU. The AstraZeneca vaccine is grown in bioreactors. I've seen how complex the process is at this site in Oxford. By contrast, there have been poor yields at the main European site in Belgium. The EU is threatening legal action to force AstraZeneca to hand over some doses made here.
We can and will get doses of the vaccine from the series of plants which are mentioned in the contract, and therefore also including those in the United Kingdom.
And there's another twist. Germany's vaccine committee has said the AstraZeneca jab should, for now, not be given to people aged 65 and above. It cited insufficient evidence in how effective it is in older people. The government here firmly rejects that.
Our own authorities have made it very clear that they think the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is very good and efficacious. They think that it is effective across all age groups and provides a good immune response across all age groups.
There is limited evidence on how well the AstraZeneca vaccine works in the over 65s, but leading scientists here say they're confident it will give strong protection.
And Fergus joins me now. So more good news, another vaccine, potentially Novavax. How significant could that prove to be?
Huge, Sophie. Now, this is already in the hands of the medical regulator, the MHRA. It began what they call a rolling review of the data from these UK trials of the Novavax vaccine earlier this month. And they have to prove that it's safe and effective. If they approve it, then it'll be produced here, and it will put rocket boosters under the UK vaccine programme, which is already outstripping most of Europe. So it's brilliant news. And the fact that it's effective, highly effective, against the UK variant, and less so effective, but still effective against the South African one, fantastic news.
You were talking just now about the AstraZeneca jab in Germany. They're advising it not to be given to the over 65. Should people here be worried, people who've had it?
Well, there's no concerns about safety. In fact, there were fewer side effects in older people who received the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in the trials. This is about effectiveness. Now, there isn't much effectiveness data from the trials, but what the medical regulator and the scientists at Oxford and those who advised the government all said was the immune responses of the elderly were so strong and so similar to younger adults that the vaccine should be effective. We'll get more data on that soon. And there may be a bit of vaccine nationalism here from the Germans. They've bought up extra supplies of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine developed in Germany, and they will use that for those aged 65 and over.
Fergus Walsh, thank you. Well, France, Portugal and Germany are just some of the EU member states struggling to get hold of enough vaccine supplies. Vaccinations are having to be postponed before the rollout has really begun. Germany's health minister says the country is facing a shortage well into April and warned of at least 10 tough weeks ahead. Jenny Hill reports on the difficulties Germany is facing.
A waiting room without any patients. A vaccination centre without any vaccine. Germany relied on the EU to place its orders, a decision which may have come at a cost.
We really feel it here. People keep asking us why we haven't been vaccinated yet. At the end of the day, these are political decisions, which I have to accept. But I am looking forward to the time when we have enough vaccine and can get on with it.
So, wir gehen jetzt durch die Stadtmauer.
No tourists now for city guide Theresia. Immunity would bring life back to Marburg streets, restart the German economy. But just 2% of the population have had their first dose of the vaccine so far.
Ich finde es sehr gut.
Even so, she tells us, it was right for the EU to order vaccine together. If everyone in Germany gets vaccinated, but not people in the countries around it, then the plague comes back over the border. If we do it, we should do it together, even if we have to wait.
Months of restrictions here appear to be paying off. Germany's infection rates are now falling. But there's real concern about the impact of new variants like those discovered in Britain or South Africa. And while the German government has pledged to offer every citizen a vaccination by the end of the summer, that's starting to look like a very hard promise to keep.
So far, Germany's relied on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The manufacturer has announced delays, though a new production site here in Marburg is expected to boost output. Supplies too are expected from Moderna and, if approved and on time, AstraZeneca, though Germany may only give it to the under-65s.
We want to know what took so long. We want to know which member states were rather reluctant in ordering together and which member states said, hey, let's go forward. I think it would have been a great sign from Germany as the economically strongest member state to say, hey, if it's a question of money, we'll just lay, let's say, 10 billion euro on the table to get things going.
Marburg's vaccination centre closed now, though they expect supplies to arrive next week. No one's quite sure what happens after that, and even the German government warned today the next 10 weeks will be tough. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Marburg.
The latest government coronavirus figures show there were 28,680 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is now 28,584, a big fall since the start of the month. Across the UK, an average of almost 37,000 people were in hospital with coronavirus over the 7 days to Sunday, including suspected cases in Wales. 1,239 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the past week, 1,221 deaths were announced every day. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 103,126. Half of those people have died since the start of November. Well, the UK's mass vaccination programme continues. It appears to have slowed a bit in the past week, but 282,812 people have had their first dose of one of the 3 approved COVID-19 vaccines in the latest 24-hour period, taking the overall number of people who've had their first jab to more than 7.4 million. Boris Johnson says endless talk about a Scottish independence referendum is completely irrelevant while the UK battles the pandemic. The Prime Minister was speaking on a visit to Scotland today. The SNP said his trip was not essential during a national lockdown and said he was panicking as opinion polls indicate declining support for the union. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon reports.
From the Lighthouse COVID testing lab in Glasgow
And you're doing 85,000 tests a day.
to a community vaccination centre being set up with the help of the army to this vaccine manufacturing plant. There's no mistaking the message the Prime Minister was sending. With growing talk of another vote on Scotland's future, Boris Johnson was here to emphasise what he believes are the benefits of the country remaining united.
I think endless talk about a referendum without any clear description of what the constitutional situation will be after that referendum is completely irrelevant now to the concerns of most people who I think want us to beat this pandemic and come through it strongly together.
But that constitutional question does loom large. There's an election to Holyrood in 3 months' time, and the SNP are riding high in the polls. Today, they questioned whether the Prime Minister's trip was essential travel.
People are really asking, why is the Prime Minister coming to Scotland on a day trip? Of course, we've got the situation that there's a marked difference in the approval rating of the First Minister, who's shown true leadership through this crisis in Scotland, and what we've seen with the Prime Minister, and I think people are just reflecting on that.
The pandemic dominates daily life and conversation here in Scotland, but questions about the country's future have not gone away. Whether or not Scotland should become an independent country is the fault line in Scottish politics. And every poll since June has suggested more people would vote yes to Scottish independence than no.
Oh, there's no doubt that the union is as much pressure as it has been, frankly, during the 300 years of its existence. There's been a very clear rise in support for independence. 2 principal reasons. 1, the pursuit of Brexit, which is relatively unpopular in Scotland. And 2, the perception, the widespread perception that Nicola Sturgeon has handled the coronavirus pandemic much more effectively than the Prime Minister.
The taxi drivers at one location the Prime Minister visited today said they were grateful for government help to pay their bills during the pandemic, but had divided views on those in charge.
Without a doubt, Nicola Sturgeon.
Why is that?
She's got her priorities right. He's breaking his own rules. He's up here glory grabbing
I think he's welcome if he wants to come and visit. As far as I'm concerned, it's a United Kingdom, so he's as welcome here as he is anywhere else.
Boris Johnson has repeatedly stated his opposition to another referendum on independence. UK approval is needed for any vote. But the SNP say if they win May's election, they'll still pass legislation to allow for it once the COVID crisis is over. A possible fight in the courts over this and a renewed battle over Scotland's future beckons. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Glasgow.
Let's go to Westminster and our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Just how worried is the Westminster government about the state of the union?
Well, Sophie, there's certainly rising concern, and not just in the Tory government, but also in the other parties, Labour and the Lib Dems, who want the countries in the UK to stay together forever. But that rising concern is matched with a rising determination to do something to try to counter the arguments of the SNP. But quite what that something is, when you ask, well, it gets a little bit trickier. You know, the SNP is the third biggest party here in Westminster, but they are by far and away the most dominant force in Scottish politics. And it looks like they are set to do very well in those crucial elections in May. We know if that happens, they'll try to push as soon as they can for another vote on independence. We know that the Prime Minister is determined at that point to say no to that request, as he has the legal right to do. But the concern among unionists is that what would then happen is a really fraught period of constitutional wrangling and argument between Edinburgh and Westminster, continued attempts by the SNP to try to get a vote somehow. It's worth saying also the SNP aren't all on exactly the same page about the best thing to do in that situation. But there is a fear among unionists here that you'd end up in a very messy, unhappy sort of situation where the argument was far from settled. There's a view that there is a problem in that circumstance, that it might not be sustainable, but there isn't anything like a clear view of a solution to try to stop that happening. And Number 10 knows very well that they're trying to seek opportunities to underline the relevance to the UK government to voters in Scotland. But they know that seeing Boris Johnson in a lab coat on a one-day visit can't be the answer on its own.
Laura Kuenssberg, thank you. The outspoken Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has denounced his continued detention, calling it demonstratively illegal after his appeal to be freed from jail was rejected by a judge in Moscow. Mr. Navalny was detained 10 days ago, accused of failing to comply with a suspended sentence. Tens of thousands of Russians took to the streets at the weekend in support of Mr. Navalny, who says he was the target of an assassination attempt last August. Steve Rosenberg reports.
From inside jail, via video link, the Kremlin's most ferocious critic demanded his freedom. Alexei Navalny told the court his arrest was illegal, an attempt to scare him and his supporters. It wouldn't work, he added. We are the majority. The judge dismissed his appeal. More pressure. Police raiding Mr. Navalny's anti-corruption organisation. It had posted this video of Mr. Navalny accusing Vladimir Putin of building himself a £1 billion palace with illicit money. The Kremlin's denied it, but the videos had nearly 100 million views in a week. Palaces and political battles. What are Russians making of all of this outside Moscow? Tver is 100 miles away. Last weekend there were protests here and across Russia in support of Mr. Navalny and against President Putin. Police broke them up. Among those detained was Pavel. It was the first time he'd taken part in a protest. A lot of people, Pavel says, have watched that video about the palace and believe it. We did nothing wrong. We were protesting peacefully. Protest sentiment was already on the rise here. An economic slowdown, made worse by the pandemic, has hit Russians hard and shaken people's faith in their president. Putin's not the leader he was, says Yevgenia. Prices in the shops keep rising. He must have something to do with this. The president's losing popularity, says Yelena. This won't end well for him.
You could put a political opponent behind bars.
One thing you cannot do, though, is lock away, put out of sight, the public mood. And the Kremlin's problem is that with the economy here in difficulty, Russians feel that life is getting tougher. And that means growing dissatisfaction with the authorities. But the Kremlin has this warning. Illegal protest brings chaos. The last thing Russia needs, it says, is another Russian revolution. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Tver.
Let's take a look at some of today's other news now. And most pupils in Northern Ireland will not return to school until Monday, the 8th of March at the earliest. First Minister Arlene Foster said the ongoing public health situation meant remote learning must continue. Even then, it may only be certain year groups who are able to go back. The stationery chain Paperchase has been bought out of administration in a deal rescuing up to 90 of its 127 stores. Around 1,000 jobs will be saved at the company, which saw sales plummet during the pandemic. But more than 200 jobs will still go. The government has announced plans to end the badger cull to tackle tuberculosis in cattle. The highly controversial strategy has seen an estimated 100,000 animals killed since it was introduced in 2013. Badgers can help to spread bovine TB, which last year led to the slaughter of almost 30,000 cattle. And two men who organised a mass snowball fight during lockdown have each been fined £10,000. Hundreds gathered in a park in Leeds when heavy snow carpeted the city earlier this month. Police said they put people at a significant and completely unnecessary risk. There'll be a vote on the cladding crisis in Parliament on Monday. The Labour motion urges the government to do more to protect millions of leaseholders from the cost of replacing flammable cladding on flats. 3.5 years after the Grenfell fire, the majority of blocks identified with dangerous cladding are still unsafe. Leaseholders are having to pay thousands of pounds in the meantime for fire safety patrols and other temporary measures. Sarah Corker's been speaking to the first person to declare bankruptcy because of those spiralling costs.
I've always wanted to be a homeowner before I'm 30, so when I did at 27, I just felt like I'd won the lottery, and the last thing you think is you're going to be bankrupt at 28. From fine to disaster, for me, it was a matter of months.
Hayley bought a one-bedroom flat in Leeds in 2019, but just 6 months later, she was told flammable cladding and other fire safety faults had been found on the building.
It didn't for 1 second occur to me that they could sell me something that's a death trap and completely unsuitable. You just don't think that anyone would ever build a flat or a home out of something that could go up in smoke that quickly.
Then the bills started to arrive.
My service charge went up, my insurance went up, my wage didn't go up. I'd actually been made redundant pre-pandemic.
Flat owners were forced to pay for round-the-clock wardens known as Waking Watch.
My mortgage payments was $330 a month, and the Waking Watch was actually $300, and it's just been a complete nightmare.
Last month, Hayley left. Her money had run out.
I declared myself bankrupt, surrendered my keys to my mortgage lender, and I'd accepted my fate, really. I feel like now going forward, the rest of my future's ruined. Those future years are also gone, and there are thousands and thousands of people just like me on a similar income in a similar problem.
Hayley's now temporarily living in her dad's spare room while she looks for work.
I've never felt so insignificant and so unimportant and powerless as I have this year. Just when you think you've hit rock bottom, you find there's another layer to this. I didn't build the building, I didn't choose any cladding, and now I'm going to be skint forever.
Hayley Tillotson ending that report from our Consumer Affairs correspondent Sarah Corker. Now, GameStop, it's an American high street shop selling video games and consoles. Major hedge funds had bet billions of dollars that GameStop's shares would fall. But over the past 3 days, its share price suddenly soared. At its highest price, it had increased by more than 700% in just a week. It was all down to social media, as amateur investors were encouraged by posts on the popular online forum Reddit to buy up stock. Today, the share price fell sharply, and that's because trading platforms in the US placed restrictions on the stock. It's led to accusations that interests of Wall Street are being put before those of individual traders. Well, our New York correspondent Michelle Fleury joins me now. And this has all caused turmoil on the markets.
It certainly has. I mean, Wall Street has been on a roller coaster ride, and it is all because of the power of social media and the havoc that it's wrought this week on the financial markets. What we've seen is a group essentially of Wall Street outsiders who've taken on institutional investors, and it's all centred around an unprofitable, somewhat unloved video game retailer, GameStop. Some of these big professional hedge fund investors had bet that the share price would go down. But what happened is you saw this scrappy group of individual investors using nothing more than a keyboard and access to the internet, as well as in some cases stimulus checks, to try and buy up the stock and push up the price. That led to some very hefty losses for these players and quite a lot of egg on their faces. And it has caught the attention not just of those on Wall Street, but also in Washington, where regulators are now looking into this and where people are seeing this as, in some ways, a popular uprising against the financial establishment.
Michelle, thank you. Scotland's spending plans for the coming year have been outlined in the Scottish Parliament today. Workers will pay less income tax according to the draft budget, and extra cash will be given to local authorities. The budget includes £1.1 billion of spending on jobs and employment support, extra money for the health service to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, and more funds for education. Our Scotland correspondent Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
Hello! Now use your thumb just to keep your foot nice and flat on the gauge.
Kerry Guinea hoped today's draft budget would be the perfect fit for her retail businesses in Peebles in the Scottish borders.
I have some shoes to try.
With both her shops closed, she's doing socially distanced shoe fittings, like this one with one-year-old Imogen.
Perfect. Now,
she had hoped business rates relief would be extended for longer than 3 months.
We need help and support for at least the next year onwards, just to get us back up and running, to keep our high streets, keep our high streets going.
Delivering her second budget, Kate Forbes said that she couldn't make that commitment without additional funding from the UK government.
I know how crucial this year's targeted 100% relief from non-domestic rates has been to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. The extension of this relief to avoid a cliff edge in support was the #1 ask of businesses.
The Scottish Tories said there had been unprecedented support from the UK Treasury.
The budget for the coming year will be the highest in the history of devolution, giving the Scottish Government more money to spend than at any previous point in history. And all this is possible because of the broad shoulders of the UK Government.
Nurses have been on the front line of the COVID pandemic. Today there was a pay increase for public sector workers, 3% for the lowest paid, 1% for others.
The offer that has been put forward today through the budget is an absolute insult to public service workers who have gone above and beyond over the past year during this COVID pandemic, but not only the COVID pandemic, at any time.
The Finance Secretary said that despite these challenging times, this budget, which will be voted on in March, looks towards economic recovery. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News.
Football now, and Liverpool got their Premier League title defence back on track tonight after a series of poor results, with a convincing 3-1 win at Tottenham. Natalie Perks watched the action.
A stuttering start, a lack of energy and 0 goals. Yep, Liverpool's league form this year is pretty much all of us right now. And it looked like Son had made things much worse for them straight away. As he wheeled away in celebration, though, VAR drew the dreaded line, offside by a heel. There was no time to draw breath. Mane looked menacing, and on the stroke of half-time, Liverpool finally made their pressure count.
Firmino coming in, and there's the goal.
Their first league goal of 2021 was swiftly followed by their second, seconds into the second half. With Harry Kane off injured, Tottenham needed to respond very quickly, and boy did Højbjerg get the memo.
And what a way to score your first goal for the club.
This was frenetic. Mo Salah thought he'd scored, but VAR ruled it out for handball. Liverpool, though, were unperturbed, and Mane got the goal he deserved.
Finished off by Sadio Mane brilliantly.
3-1 Liverpool then, and in a season of twists and turns, the champions look to be getting their groove back. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
And finally, a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor had his first COVID jab from an army medic this week. It struck a chord because a photo of his vaccination went viral on social media. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports.
The tattoo on his arm shows 93-year-old Herschel Herskovik has faced death many times before, his Auschwitz number. Given a chance this week to extend life again when vaccinated by a young British Army medic, Private Maddie Oliver. Herschel lost 7 siblings. He survived concentration camps, the death marches. Still a teenager, he lost his sight from typhus after liberation and survived COVID last month. Now he has some protection. His son David took the photo, which has been shared tens of thousands of times on social media, immensely grateful to the soldier who vaccinated his father in North East London.
Thank you very much for the vaccination you gave to my father, and in the process of knocking out a virus, I've made you viral. How that?
To see your dad such an amazing man and been through so much. I think it was just inspiring, and it's just so lovely that I got to vaccinate such a lovely man.
They had no idea the picture would resonate with so many, from Private Oliver's mum to the brigadier in charge of the Army's role in COVID vaccinations.
For the shop scratch.
Thousands of soldiers helping in the effort to get vaccines into arms.
How do you feel that he's been given this chance to hopefully extend his life?
It's all just amazing. We talk about the difficulties and the terrible tragedy that has befallen many people, but yet there's plenty of hope and light in it, just as my father has always said, that there is light in his darkness.
Herschel Herskovik's outstretched arm, where the most terrible symbol of grief and pain meets hope. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
And that's it from us. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Good night.